it's funny. We steer, and I would say they chase, right? So based on the number of copycat lawsuits, there's a lot of attorneys that chase. Would love to see some laws around that.
Like that.
I'm writing that one. That's a T-shirt.
You talk about it privately, we talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James DeWiggins, along with my counterpart, Mr. Crazy Uncle Robinson.
Again, that's the new one, huh?
I don't know.
Hey,
I just got to switch it up a little bit. So
let's ride with it. I'm down. Call me whatever you want.
Talk to us about our guest, Tim Dain, the CEO of NorthstarMLS. This was a juicy conversation.
Yeah.
Like we went deep on some really interesting stuff and things probably people haven't even heard of yet. So
Yeah, or really even thought about.
Sure.
We talked about data, the importance of it, how the MLS could fit into using that data to really enhance the consumer experience, not only in the transaction, but beyond it. So some different ways that value could be provided. Just imagine knowing, for example, the serial number of every appliance in the home, and what could you do with that? Really thoughtful and interesting conversation. He was also at the Minnesota School of Law. I call it the not so open forum, but they called it the open forum regarding the settlement. He was there. He unpacks what that experience was like, shares a really thoughtful and balanced expression of what that experience was like. Definitely worth listening to,
especially with all the lawyers that were there talking about our industry. So
yeah. He was the one sort of in the room where it happened for that specific experience. Really, really great conversation, thoughtful one. You're gonna dig it. Put it in your ears, kids.
Tune in. Tim, welcome to the podcast. We are super excited to have you here today. I feel like I haven't seen you. It's been like a week, I think, since I ran into you at T360. Always a great event. I know we have a lot to talk about, and as Keith and I always reference, there's never a slow news day in residential real estate these days. It used to be you had to come up with stuff to create headlines, but now that's not the case.
Now we just turn the microphone on.
It's just a good day if we don't get a CID, right?
There you go.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
That's a good comment. We're going to quote that. So, so let's start with giving the viewers and listeners a little bit about your background. Tell us sort of how you got to where you are, your career path, something super interesting that nobody knows. And then we'll hit a few rapid fire questions. So we'll start with that.
Yeah, so let's start at high school. Why not? I graduated a year early, just so I could join the Marine Corps.
Wow,
I had my parents sign a waiver and went in at 17. I turned 18 in boot camp. And something nobody knows is that my dad had a friend that was a very high-ranking Navy, I guess retired at the time, but he decided to address something to me via his old commander title or whatever he was, lieutenant colonel or something in the Navy, and he sent me an Easter basket. And so I literally had to skip around boot camp. For 3 days, I couldn't walk or run. I had to skip slow or fast everywhere I went with my basket and a bunny rabbit bootstrapped into it behind the formation. You know, so if you ever want to
shut up,
Marine Corps boot camp, have a Navy guy send them. It's good fun. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, the fact it's from the Navy makes it even more funny just because of, by the way, before we even joke around all of that, thank you for your service.
Yeah, totally.
My brother was Marine Corps, went through boot camp at Pendleton and was in SATCOM. And he's one of the few people that drove a Humvee into a river, not intentionally. So, or maybe it was, who knows?
Yeah.
But thank you for your service, genuinely. People don't appreciate that.
Everywhere with a stuffed bunny strapped to your
back.
Yeah.
I had to skip everywhere I went to chow to even when they were jogging. I had to skip faster behind the formation. So skipping for a mile and a half, 2 miles is far harder than jogging. Just so you know, far harder.
Did the military pay for your therapy after?
No. They do. They call them drill instructors. That's your therapy.
Do you hate Easter from now on and forever?
So in there, I
What?
got to do. I was a what they call fire direction control. So it's a lot of math, slide rulers, calculating trajectory and impact area for field artillery rounds. So a lot of fun. Um, but from that, I think I had sort of a love of mathematics. And so after I got out of the Marine Corps, I felt like I was behind my peers because they were all graduating from college. So I, instead of going to college at the time, Microsoft certifications were huge, right? So I found a website that you could literally study the test. I never actually studied technology. I studied the tests for Microsoft certifications. So I got certified DBA, certified sysadmin, certified C+. I mean, if there was a certification, I would go test for it. That led to a job because I met somebody through that process that worked at a casino. So I spent the next, I don't know, 6 or 7 years doing casino database conversions all over North and South America, which was
Wow.
so that was my intro to tech. My father-in-law was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, so I had to sell my home and move in with my in-laws to help him through the end of life. And while I was selling my home, agents are always recruiting, so they're recruiting the person selling their home too. And after I had a bad experience with one or two agents, I think the third or fourth or fifth finally sold my home, and they convinced me to get into real estate since I had to stop traveling and sort of help the family through that transition of life phase. It was a really good, it was a bad time, but a good experience because I sort of found an entrepreneurial bent that I don't think I had before that a lot of people find in this industry. So I started at Remax. I was an agent for a couple of years there and then opened my own small brokerage and started the first sort of green community in our area, selling for a couple of developer friends of mine. And it was 2008. The market was crashing. Nobody was buying homes, much less overpriced green
good
homes.
Times.
So lost everything. During that time, I found my way onto an MLS board of directors just because I had sort of the tech experience. So I got recruited there, and like the MLS, that executive ended up the person that was CEO there ended up hiring me, and from there I took a CEO job and I ran an MLS in Southern Illinois, Austin, St. Louis, and now here in Minnesota. And somewhere in the middle of it, I got to be a tech executive at Remind for about a year and a half and meet some great people like Leo Perea, Chelsea Goyer.
That's awesome. What a
journey.
What a journey, man. That's quite the. But I'm going to be honest with you, and I just want you to know that we're friends. Okay, so, but I might bring. There might bring an Easter bunny to the next conference, and like you have to wear it for at least an hour, just so that people will. If anybody listens to the pod, which is pretty much everybody at this point, will understand what's going on, and those that don't will be a very interesting conversation. So,
by the way, I got a lot of C pluses too, so I don't know why you're bragging about
that. There's a serious amount of trauma you're going to dig up if you do that. There's a cool way to do it in a weird way, like if it's a purple stuffed bunny. Maybe not. If you get me one of those like Dead Bunny T-shirts from a concert or something, maybe there's some cool factor to it.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Well, thank you for the advice on what I now know what I need to get you. So, all right, my friend. Well, we'll go to a couple rapid fires and then we'll dive into a lot of the main topics today. So, Keith, start us off, and then I'll wrap up with the other question. So
this is something we love to ask every guest, mostly so I can round out my reading list or listening list. So favorite book or podcast this year or recently or ever? There's not a ton of rules here, and why?
Yeah, I don't really do podcasts, oddly. I do a lot of vlogs that I subscribe to, but podcasts aren't my thing. Probably the most recent book I've read that makes the favorite list is Our Iceberg is Melting. I don't know if you guys know Amy Gorse from Presta Team. She does some consulting. She did some work for us in a continuing education class, and we all had to read it. And it's a timely book for right now because it's about change and how you succeed kind of under any condition. And there's a whole cast of penguins whose iceberg is literally melting under them, right? And they have to explore how to find a new home. And you got the weirdo, right? The guy that notices it's melting that everybody hates because that person's pointing out how their life has to change now. And then you have, the really inquisitive people that study the whole penguins that study it all and want to know every detail. You got a character called No that's just like, no, this iceberg isn't melting. Don't get off of it. So it draws a lot of correlations to kind of what the industry is going through right now.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read that one. It was years ago, but I've read that one, and it's fun because literally each penguin is a character type, really. And I remember transitioning a real estate office at the time and thinking, like, I literally could put people started replacing the penguins in the stories for me. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good book.
That's funny. We could probably think of people that we would relate to each one of those.
Yep.
We're going to create a page on our podcast website that's the links to all the books that everybody recommends or the pods. So that's coming out soon too. We'll add that to it. All right, last question on rapid fire. If you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be and why?
I think for everybody it's an easy answer, but I don't think you want the easy answer. I mean, the easy answer, if you've ever lost anybody you loved, is to sit down with them at another lunch, right? So I could name several people in my life or in my family that I'd love to have lunch with again. But I don't think you wanted that answer, so I dug a little deeper.
It's your answer.
You know,
there's no right.
I want to go with somebody I'm not connected to because I think they're always more interesting, right? So probably for me it'd be either Admiral McRaven, who a lot of people probably
is that the make your bed?
Yeah,
dude?
That's the make your bed dude. I mean, you know, it's a great video. It's a great message, right? And the military guy in me loved it. And then, if I'm not going with military, though, it's probably Simon Sinek. I love everything he puts out, the infinite game and talking about game theory and, the finite game versus the infinite game. And I think there's a lot of correlations between that and our industry, too. There's so many people that want to publish, number one brokerage, number one agent. I even did a class once called I'm Number One, and it was teaching everybody in the class how to say they were number one. Like I sold the most homes on Cherry Street in 2021, right? But Simon talks about how it's just unimportant. Like go for the infinite game, not the finite game. You should be building a generational business and not a business for this year.
He's great, by the way, if you see him live.
He's phenomenal.
I've seen him twice, and he's really phenomenal. That calmness that he has about him, and just the way he speaks, it's just you're just listening, trying to soak all that in.
On the make my bed thing, like I do enjoy I think his speech is amazing, and his book is actually pretty good. I just have gotten into a sparring session with some people online. Like you can be very successful in life and never make your bed. Which his point, I think, is start the day with a win, right? Start the day doing something really well, which I fully agree with. But he's got such a rabid following. Charles Moreno, I'm talking to you. He's got such a rabid following that like I made a post once and a bunch of people came at me in the comments. So
we call them keyboard warriors, Keith. So
yeah. But some people were ready to take it to the streets. Yeah. Man, they were pissed.
Yeah. They can meet you in the streets. It'll be a very short meeting. So, all right, my friends. So let's get in some talking points because there's a lot of interesting stuff, and I want to make sure we cover the forum that you attended. But we'll go through a few to begin with. So, February, Northstar Technology is acquired by RE which is that's a CRMLS entity. Is that correct? Make sure I got that right.
I'd say founded by CRMLS, but not necessarily a CRMLS.
Founded, okay.
Moving forward, right? So they've set it up so that it's an arm's length company away from them. It is.
Got it. Okay. Entity. All right. So they separate thing. Talk to us about that. And we actually haven't really talked about RE Course. So talk to us a little bit about that and the technology that was acquired because you were involved in all of this stuff. I'd love to hear some background on that.
Yeah, I'd say first thing is, there's an announcement and then there's going through the legal process, which we're still going through. So it'll get done, but it's not done yet. But they're buying we build a lot of our own technology here in-house or have historically, right? So we have something we call the Common Data Platform, which is essentially a database. And then we have listing input really are the two big things we built. We built several other things, but those were built to sort of drive consolidation in Minnesota, right? You don't have to consolidate with us. We don't have to acquire you. Let's just share an input and share a database so that everybody has access to the same information. It's been overwhelmingly successful. Northstar has all except for 3 MLSs in Minnesota now, and those 3 combined are roughly, 1,200 members or so out of the 25,000. So, and then we've expanded into North Dakota and Wisconsin a little bit with the same concept. So largely successful. And I think CRMLS has been on a similar journey on that. They heard of things like carrots. You've probably seen their database. They built a lot of their own tech. So when I took this job, I hired my predecessor, Mosey, to do some sort of executive consulting. And we put him on a plane and flew him around to multiple MLSs to meet with them and talk about their strategies, where they see the future of the industry, how they see the lawsuits playing out, those kind of things. And CRMLS was sort of at its early stage of launching RE Core, so it hadn't become public at the first conversation. But we latched on pretty quickly to the fact that they're essentially separating their technology out of their MLS into this company that's going to be owned by MLS's brokers and, agents, interested parties within so owned by the industry, sort of, I don't know if controlled's the right word, but controlled by the industry. So them moving all their tech there made a lot of sense to us.
Yeah.
And we decided we wanted in on it. So we're selling some of our tech. We'll convert some of our other technology because we don't see the point in the future of having all these tiny databases all over the United States, right? As AI grows, as machine learning grows, your data sets have to be larger and larger to be at all meaningful to anybody in those use cases. So joining up with them, converting over our database at some point in the future is part of the goal. And then selling them our ad edit gives sort of listing input into a company that's built sort of by MLS for MLS, if you will. But we adopted their dashboard. So they built a dashboard and transferred it over. We adopted that. It's more of a back office system with a user dashboard. So a lot of the administrative stuff around compliance is built into it, marketing, communications. They were a Salesforce shop and they wanted some of that same administrative capabilities, but built for real estate. So that's why I think that's their motivation behind that dashboard administrative piece, and it makes a lot of sense to us.
Well, let me ask you, so just so I want to shape this up, make sure I understood it. So it's a way that these MLSs can join together into a common database, but you're not merging all of these MLSs. Did I get that right? I mean, they're not going away. They're just using a common system.
Let me be clear. That was CDP's goal, right? What we called Common Data Platform. RE Core has the same thing. You can choose to do it or not. So the goal of RE Core is not to combine all databases. They have a database service. You could license it if you're an MLS, and then you can more easily share information there because you're in the same sort of database structure. And it'll make sense, more and more sense as more and more people license that product. RE Core really is a SaaS company, though, for MLS software. So dashboard, listing input, compliance modules, marketing modules, those kind of.
Would that mean they're competitive to Black Knight, or I guess it's called Ice now or whatever, or like Paragon or others? Would be a competitive system?
I think some people might, in a way, think of it that way. I think of it more as enhancing competition amongst those companies. So far, RE Core has not built a front-end technology like a Matrix or a Paragon or a Flex system.
Got it.
I don't think they have plans to.
Yeah, plumbing
but having the database, them feeding off of that database, having the listing input be separated out of that and be sort of a standalone module gives a lot more flexibility to do things at MLS's like front end of choice, to put them in a more competitive mode as vendors.
Where do you see, I have two questions on this specifically, and Keith knows I kind of nerd out on this. So where do you see MLSs going with, we've got decoupling coming, which everyone's like, oh, the MLS has no value. I'm like, you're totally missing the point of it. But where do you think MLSs are going to be, let's say in 5 years? Does it the same data? Is it enhanced data? Like, what is you're obviously you've got all the designations. What do you think from a tech perspective MLSs look like?
I guess I'll answer this way. The short answer is I don't know, and I think that's okay. I think though, like I have regular meetings starting up with IBM Watson, right, and like talking to them about sort of this concept of, I don't know how to say it. There's sort of a famous story at a car company where they started a skunk works, they funded it fully, and they said, go put us out of business, right? And I'm starting to think of 5 years from now in the same way.
Right.
Like, I want to go into a think tank, if you will, so to speak, right now. And it's what we're doing here, and start thinking about what is the thing that puts us out of business, and can we be the ones that put ourselves out of business? I think RE Core is part of that vision.
Right.
I think that, you attended T3, James. By the way, you look shorter on camera, just so you know, and so your audience knows. But at T3, they opened with AI, right?
I'm actually bending down right now. I'm on my knees. So, yeah.
I mean, every single place you go, it's AI, AI. I've got a subscription to a morning email from TLDR that's all the moves that happened in AI. The real truth is, I don't think anybody can predict what AI
I subscribe
does
to that too.
In the next 5 years. It's insane.
No.
Nope.
Except Keith and I debate this. I think the world's going to end. I'm more on the Rob Hahn camp, and then Keith's like, stop. So, by the way, I have an idea that we should play at the next conference. So I'm gonna pose this to Jack and everybody else. We need to play AI bingo, and then there's shot glasses. So like, start in the morning, and then we'll see how often people say AI and how long it takes to get the audience completely trashed, which I think would be about 30 minutes. So
the over under would be first.
I get it.
I've got a question for
as
Tim.
Tired of hearing about AI as I do of hearing about the lawsuits. Right? It's exhausting at this point.
Oh, by the way, that's our next question.
But the point is, I think.
Yeah.
I've got a high level question. Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Go for it, Keith.
Sorry.
The point is, though, like, where will we be in 5 years? If I had to throw a dart today, it's less is more. Right. So I think that the MLSs need to get really, really good at data in, data storage, and data out. And it's everything around the home. But, here in Minnesota, we have lake data that has the clarity throughout the seasons, like how much moss is growing or whatever is growing in the lake at different seasons. I think all of that's going to become really important, but we need to get way better at supporting you guys, brokers, agents, on data in, data storage, data out, like making it more accessible, reso driving towards interoperability. If you want to build your own front end, why should I force you to use Matrix? I think Matrix is great. It's a good choice, but if you're Redfin or you're anywhere and you got the resources to invest in building your own experience, as long as that data is free flowing between all the systems, why should we care what you use?
It's interesting. I know Keith has a question. I just wanted to pin something on that. When I think about that comment you made about data, we really are nowhere close to where we should be. If you think about like products, for example, there's a company called Revive. There's a bunch of them that do this, where they can look at the pictures of a property and tell you approximately what the cost would be to remodel the house, and then what the cash increase in value would be on that property. Like, to me, that's the kind of data that needs to be in there. Or, for example, what the hell is the heating and air conditioning cost for the property on a monthly basis? Because, I've heard stories, people buy the place and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea it was going to cost $1,000 a month for propane. I'm in the winters. Like, that's a meaningful number to the average American. I feel like that's something that we have to be thinking about, of how do we keep this data. As another example, serial numbers for appliances, so we have a context to what the person's buying, and there's just so much more that we should be aggregating that we're not, that I think will be very useful data, very useful to the consumer. Just like, this refrigerator is 15 years old, it's past its life expectancy, just that stuff. When you're buying an asset, that's what you're looking at. So
much of the data sharing seems to stop at the agent, right? Which is, and what the human being who's buying a house wants is that data, but beyond the transaction, right? Like, to help me understand when I'm in it, give me all of the information that I need to make an informed decision, or as much of it as you can. And then also, to your point, James, post, right? Like, the refrigerator being at or near the end of its useful life.
I think about it this way, though, too. If you were to Google API library, right? You were to look at their API library, you can see every API Google has. While we don't have a quote unquote Google in our industry that can launch 50 of their own APIs for all the data they've collected from everywhere, we have a bunch of companies that have launched APIs. And where's our API library? Where's your ability as a broker or as a technologist to go to one central location and find every API in this industry, whether it's an API from, Home Depot that might do the refrigerator stuff, or an API from an MLS, or an API from Minnesota University's lake data. If we can find our way towards a library that people can subscribe to and pay for, they can build all kinds of things. We don't have to build it. We don't have to collect it all. We just have to find it and make it available.
Yeah. Is the moat there the broker? And sometimes, I've run real estate offices before. Sometimes we get a little proprietary, maybe too proprietary about our data. Where's the moat in making that happen, right? Where's the biggest gating issue in actually having this data and information unlocked for the benefit of the human being buying and selling?
I think it's a resource-driven moat. I mean, do we have some misconceived notions of data privacy? Like it's my data, I own it, nobody can use it. Sure, because at the end of the day, I think if everybody understood that there was fact data and then there's copywritten data, and the majority of the MLS data is fact data, right? So little of it is something that's copyrightable. Right. And if they actually treated the copywritten data in a way that had good hygiene for the broker, I've seen so many agents and brokers sign agreements that give away the rights to all of their media and their marketing content after the listing is done being marketed, right? And it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. Right. You mean people don't read?
Yeah, and they don't read the things that are gonna protect what they actually do own, what their copyright is, right? It's a weird future, especially around media.
And not only do they not read, I think they tilt towards overprotective, right? Like they sort of try to put a wall around all of it, as opposed to trying to figure out, to your point, Tim, what is and isn't copyrightable, what is and isn't going to be beneficial, right? They just were like, let me just put a wall around all this and block it off. That feels safer, which it may feel safer, but often how you feel is not a good indication of what you should do, right? Because you've got to think about the end user, the human being who's buying and selling a house, whether they're buying it now and information that would be beneficial, or whether they're going to be selling it in the future, and what information could be beneficial in the future when you're trying to sell. So it's there's some psychology there that's bumping up and rubbing up against the technology, and they're not always pointed in the same direction.
Tim, I want to shift this a little bit to a couple other topics just due to time. So I really want to get your take on some things. So I'm going to combine a couple questions I have because I think they're just sort of the same. One is your take on the class action settlement from an MLS perspective. And I'm going to piggyback that into, you attended the Minnesota School of Law Open Forum. I believe that was last month. And I want you to talk to everybody about what that was, and then sort of what happened, and probably prefacing everybody should grab a cocktail first. So, so can you go down those two roads, just your opinion first, and then talk to us about this forum that you were present for, which unfortunately most of our industry was not present for. So my
opinion on the settlement, and I think, I've heard people phrase this as like good, bad, status quo kind of thing. And I don't want to be as simple as that. I don't think there's a overwhelmingly good, bad, or status quo here. I think the good that will come out of it is that it's forcing all of us to think about our business model, to think about our change. Whether you're a broker, an MLS, an agent, there's some real good that's coming out of this, because people are going to think about how they reinvent themselves and how they serve the consumer, or how they get more transparent. That's good, right? The bad is that, really, if I boil it down from an MLS executive perspective, all the settlement does is kind of hurt small businesses in the United States. There's 540 MLSs. They're all small business, no matter how big they are, right? If you classify them based on annual revenue, whatever, they're small businesses. Taking comp out of the MLS, but allowing it to continue in exactly the same fashion it always has, no matter where it goes, broker website, some aggregation, something disconnected, all you've done is put the MLS at a disadvantage in that marketplace, and all you've done is force it into a shadow area, which I know you guys have talked about, so we don't have to beat that up. That's just bad. If you really want to change it, there are some good ideas out there. And I won't even say that the plaintiffs, some of the plaintiffs or the people that are on the plaintiff side haven't put forward some good ideas. Like the one thing I learned from the Minnesota School of Law, I try to be objective in that. We'll go through sort of the cast of characters that was there and why you heard it was really bad for the industry. But I think the one thing that I took away from that is that almost every one of those panels agreed on one thing. This settlement is not ideal, right? Taking it out of the MLS and creating a shadow market for compensation is not good for consumers. It's actually kind of bad for consumers. So, at least there's agreement there, right? How to solve it, maybe we have some disagreement on, but I think the industry can figure it out, right? Why you heard it was bad, though, let's go through the cast of characters, maybe. So the person...
frame it up. So what it is, and then who was there.
The person that put it together was a professor at the University School of Law for Minnesota named Prentice Cox. Seemed like a really intelligent guy. He right off the bat divulged that his wife was an attorney for the plaintiffs on Moral. Her name, I think, was Marissa Katz, if I remember right. So he immediately drew a connection to what might be a biased panel, right? But he was pretty objective.
What do you mean?
Some of the other people they had, a really interesting speaker named Jordan Berry. He published a report called Et2 Agent, which is sort of the antithesis to the report that Bright MLS published on steering. So you've got sort of the plaintiff's view of the analytics behind steering, and they used a lot of data that they scraped from Redfin for 2 years to put together this 90-page, well-cited report that essentially said, as commission that was posted, so buyer side commission, right? It's allowed to be posted on websites. As that decreased, so did page views. And they've got some pretty empirical evidence there. I think what the Bright report did, though, was the Bright report put that.
Well, I'm sorry. I have to ask. Just, they're using public page data of the consumer because agents don't search for properties on Redfin. Just for clarity, I want to make sure that I'm making this understanding. They're equating to the way that consumers search on Redfin as how steering occurs.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think
that makes no logical sense at all.
I'd have to guess at their theory of why they draw that. There's some reasoning in the report. If you read it, it's actually a pretty good report.
Sure.
I would say, knowing this industry.
But agents don't search for properties.
Agents share properties, right? So you're constantly.
I
agree with you.
I just want to make sure I frame this up. Agents don't search on public websites for listings. They use the multiple listing service. They don't. Well, that's the consumer that searches on those sites. So
I'll add one other point too: is just because something might be loosely or lightly correlative, that doesn't make it causal. Those two things are very, very far apart. There could be a litany of other reasons why a property that is listed,
which I think is what Bright did in their report, right? Bright said, hey, here's all these other things we looked at, whether it be location, the condition, all these different things about the property that we think has an impact on, maybe compensation, or they didn't go into search in the Bright report, I don't think. But point being, like we all know, there's about 100 other things you could factor into this, and that's not empirical evidence. That said,
by the way, just quick show note. If you want, we have that steering report on a previous episode. You can find that in the show notes. We'll link it again here too, but we did have
from
them
Bright,
on and have
to be clear.
Yeah, from Bright, and we had them on. And if you want to find it, you can find that episode.
Sorry, Tim. That said, I think it's if you want a well-rounded view, I think you have to listen to what plaintiffs are saying, or what studies they're using, or what they're citing. And Jordan, all respect to Jordan Berry, the guy that did the report. I think he did a great job. He's also a university professor at USC. His analyst on the report was, what's the guy? Will Freed. And Will Freed was the lead analyst for Rex at the time. Not at the time he did the report, but in his history. So, again, we're building this cast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Ryan from Rex was there making a presentation about how the industry sort of forced his business model out because he didn't belong to associations or MLSs. They played several of the 700.
It was just a flawed business model. It was just a flawed business model. Let's just be clear. So
here's what's interesting.
I mean, he could have very easily just done a dollar.
And I think all of us can very easily attack the other side, right? Because we're in this business, we're sort of buried in it and immersed in it on a daily basis. I think what's interesting about Jack, I'm going to forget his business model, what he did, and everything else. What's interesting is that if you boil it down, he's a guy that took whatever money out of his own pocket, raised money with other people, had a business idea, a venture. It didn't come out the way he wanted. And like anybody in human nature, you look for what went wrong. And he points to the industry for a lot of what went wrong.
Sure.
And I'm not going to defend him, but I will say that the 700 recording phone calls he has of agents calling him aren't flattering to us, right?
Oh, for sure.
We all, I think, readily admit, sure, steering exists in this industry. We don't think it's as rampant as you might think, but anytime you have 1.5 million people, the old Marine Corps rule of thumb was 10% suck, right? That's 150,000 people in real estate. That's a lot of suck. So, and look,
Right.
No arguments,
James,
by the way.
Probably the part of this that gets played back to me in a deposition someday. They'll say, well, didn't you say that most agents suck? And no, I'm not saying that, just to be really clear. I'm saying that every industry has its 10% of people that aren't as professional as we'd like them to be.
I mean, we could probably name 10 to 20% of lawyers that suck. If not, I mean, any industry, you can pretty much find a percentage. That's
well, now that's definitely going to play that part.
That's actually an interesting point, because one of the things, I think it might have been Prentice that brought it up, that, the U.S. total labor pool was something like, 170 million, right? And real estate agents made up, over almost close to 1% of that, and that we shouldn't, right? But then when I went and looked up the people, because I always look at profiles of people that are speaking. And then I looked at his wife's profile, and in there she won an award, which congratulations to her. She's one of the better attorneys in Minnesota. But it said in there that out of 25,000 licensed attorneys in Minnesota, she won this award. And I was thinking, well, there are less licensed agents in Minnesota than licensed attorneys. So isn't that interesting that, the population's equivalent? It's funny, we steer, and I would say they chase, right? So based on the number of copycat lawsuits, there's a lot of attorneys that chase. Would love to see some laws around that.
That.
I'm writing that one. That's a T-shirt.
Who else was there? There was a CNN reporter.
That's a T-shirt.
So how did it go?
How'd it go? Not good for us, right? Rob Hahn presented too. So you got New York Times and Wall Street Journal reporters were there. You've all read those articles. Those aren't the most flattering articles. So certainly there's a media.
Yes. I don't classify Deborah as a reporter, to be clear. Reporters have journalistic integrity. She does not.
James is going out.
So, well, no, I'm married to a reporter, so I get to say that. Deborah does not have journalistic integrity at all, and there's just complete bias in it. So, so I'm assuming those are some of the cast that's been writing all the articles.
Yeah, I think one industry. Was, let's see, Laura Casuto was Wall Street Journal. I don't have it on my notes who the person was from the New York Times. But look, they've all written things about the 6% commission, and not just now, but even through history, like going back years. So to say that it wasn't flattering, it wasn't flattering. But if you listen, I think we have a real duty here to slow down and listen to what the root causes are of the problem, right? To listen to, if we are doing something that is not pro-consumer, let's figure it out and let's change the behavior. What I didn't appreciate was sort of the cheering that went on for seeing, encouraging a lot of state AGs were attending this. This was a CE credit, by the way, for attorneys. So you got CE credit if you attended. We all know that's the best way to get people to attend. So you had a lot of assistant AGs, a lot of AGs, a lot of state attorneys.
That
Yeah.
and happy
It's
hour. Yeah.
what I didn't appreciate was sort of the cheering to go file more lawsuits and the naming of all the different places you should look to
Mm.
file lawsuits. Because instead of lawsuits, I'd much rather somebody approach me and say, hey, you believe you're pro consumer. You believe you run a really good business. We believe it's beneficial to the U.S. housing market. It's proved that way. The DOJ is quoted as saying how good the MLS is. We think these things have problems. Let's talk about them. Instead of, here's a lawsuit, can you just give us all the information so we can sue you? Uh, I would love the conversations to happen, right? Because I think there are um, some valid causes for either concern or investigation into specific areas of the business. I think you guys would love to see the
Tim,
10% get
first of
out,
all,
right? Or if it's more than that, more than that. We don't want the people that are abusing the system or leveraging rules for competitive advantages. We don't want those things to exist. But I think Jordan Berry told a joke in there about two young fish swimming in a lake, and an older fish swims by them and says, "How's the water, boys?" And they get a little further away, and one of the young fishes looks at the other one and says, "What's water?" And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of
right.
people in our industry are saying what's water because these are rules that have existed for 40 years, right? 30 years, 20 years. They're water to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of our very environment. And as technology has changed, maybe the rules haven't
Yeah.
kept up with it. As society has changed, maybe we haven't kept up with it. And that's okay to admit, and it's okay to go dive deep.
Yeah. I think,
Go ahead, Keith.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think first of all, super high minded, Tim, like your thought process and approach to it. I think some of the frustration is borne out from the fact that things could be better. That's true. And this isn't better. And that can also be true, right? Both those things can exist at the same time. To your earlier point, if we're going to go through this pain to make it a better experience for the human being who buys a house, which is, or sells a house, it could have been better. And this probably isn't it, right? Whatever it should have been or could have been, this solution probably isn't the one.
Yeah.
Agree.
And just to tack on to that, like there's simple, if they really were interested in making this process better, and this is why I'm pessimistic about it, and you sense that in my tone and my words, is if they really were genuinely trying to make the industry better, it would include the industry in it in a much deeper discussion, to your point, Tim, and discussing like what are these impacts if if X occurs, what happens with Y? And you and I both know that this outcome is affecting veterans, this outcome is affecting minorities, this outcome is affecting low-income Americans. These are all things that they're going to have very negative consequences for it in the current state. And yeah, there is a lot of agents that need to go away. That doesn't mean they're bad people. They're just not in this business, and they shouldn't be doing something that's very infrequent and is complicated. Again, I don't think anybody in the industry who's been in the industry a long time disagrees with that. A lot of that, by the way, has to do with states. It has nothing to do with the industry not trying to keep people out. Licensing is done at the state level, and you can make it more complicated. There's lots of reasons for that. My thing is, to me, this is just they're disguising it in the best interest of consumer, but this is not about the consumer. If it was about the consumer, they would be thinking about how to make changes that would impact that. And a simple one, Tim, you and I think we can agree on this, is you could decouple compensation. Still needs to be in the MLS because the whole concept is transparency. That's what we've been moving towards. What the DOJ actually wanted in the settlement to begin with was transparency. And then just make it so there's a buyer rep agreement signed. Just make it so that you have a conversation with a buyer and you agree on compensation with the buyer. And then it is irrelevant to what's being offered by the seller. And you create that transparency still, and you're moving the industry in the right step. I feel personally like there needs to be more defending the industry, because like all industries, we have problems. But here's the thing. If you look at consumer satisfaction of realtors, it's very different than consumer satisfaction of lawyers or the media. They're actually at the bottom. And so like we have our problems, but we are now creating very serious issues. And I just posted an article about a veteran who has not been able to buy a house, he cannot pay his agent, and the sellers are not offering any compensation, which they always could do. But also this mainstream media driven narrative has caused it. So now there are some very serious consequences happening to the very people that make this country work. And so I don't know how we get back to a rational conversation. My disappointment was the fact they didn't have people from our industry talking as well. Like, was there any counter narrative?
Well, I think that's the biggest problem is this. And I think the reason everybody's sort of screaming for more transparency is we always say we want you to talk to us, right? And I've said it here, you said it. The big question I have is, were they and were we not listening, right? Because I'm not in the NAR conversations. And when you want to talk to the industry, if you're the DOJ, you're talking to NAR, right? And I don't know what those conversations were. We can see.
Yeah, there's no argument.
We can see outcomes like, consent decrees, CIDs, things like that. But I don't know where that conversation was or what happened there. I would love to know. And I think that moving forward, we need to have those conversations more publicly and more transparently, right? I don't want to wake up and get my news from James Dwiggin or Keith or Rob Hahn or Greg Robertson. I'd like to wake up and get my news from the organizations that are there to lead us nationally.
Yeah.
Makes for a good podcast, though.
It does.
It does.
But I mean, I think that, I don't know, it almost reminds me of, what's that old line? Like, a camel is just a horse designed by committee, right? Like, anytime compromise is hard, and I think sometimes, especially if it's a class action lawsuit, you just get boiled down in bringing closure, right? It was about closure, not about best outcome. It was about, how can we shut the door on this? Because what was starting to happen, just from our standpoint anyway, now agents were starting to get individually named, right? And at that point, you've got contagion that is spreading, and you have to just get closure on it so that the entire industry, I think, can move forward. And then sadly, that's how you end up with some unfortunate compromises, which have bad outcomes.
Well, and you said something, Keith, about like sort of being high-minded about this, and I want to acknowledge something. I think that for the 1.5 million that woke up, there's a real set of stages of grief that people go through, right? And a lot of people are in stage one.
For sure.
You, James, me, we've sort of been aware since the beginning, since the lawsuits filed 5 years ago, and I'm going out and I'm talking to an office that woke up yesterday, and right now they're angry, they're hurt, they don't understand what they did wrong, and we're asking them to get through the stages of grief between now and July, right? I've had 4 years to get there, and I've gotten to the point where I'm even okay with saying, you know what, you want bilateral agreements, that's fine. Let's go make sure that the lending system's set up to support the buyers in that way. Let's go make sure that VA's set up that way. We can make any modification we need. We just need the proper time and the proper solution for it.
So thank you for that. And also we agree with you, by the way. And it's the difference between people that are looking sort of forward and understanding what it is. The industry is going to be fine. We're going to get through this. And there's certainly changes to do. And to your comment, we'll move on to the next question here. There is changes that need to occur in this business. Those 700 voicemails were stupid, and those agents should all be fired. And there are things that need to happen, and there is changes that need to occur to make this industry better. My hope is, and I know that I'm sure everybody's listening to this now, including the DOJ or anybody else, that you sit down and put all the players in the room and have a real conversation. And when I say all the players, it's not just NAR. It's put brokers and agents in the room, put veterans and minorities in the room, put all the players in the room and go, okay, we've got this kind of mess, and we need to figure out how to come forward so that what is roughly 25% of GDP, real estate and related entities next to it, are moving the industry forward and moving the economy forward, making sure people can build generational wealth, all of that stuff, because we all know that in a vacuum, you get really bad outcomes. I
have one piece to that, James, where, and the only piece that I do count on is the the entrepreneurial nature and the relentless commitment to the human being and the transaction that residential real estate professionals have, right? Yeah. The rules will change. MLSs are going to have to figure out, with the state's forms and processes, and that part will work its way through. And the companies and the agents who, once they move through the anger and the grief and the various stages, they'll get back to being hyper and focused and committed on serving their clients at the highest level and finding a process that fits, that meets the rules and regulations and services their clients at the highest level. And that I've counted on for almost 26 years now. And, I remember, I'm old enough and been around long enough. I remember when banks were going to get into residential real estate, and, all of these other things were supposed to come in and sort of be this gong, this sounding of the end for the residential real estate professional. But their relentless commitment to serving their clients at the highest level and following the rules as they change and evolve, I count on that. And I believe on the other side of this, the industry will make it work in a positive way for the end consumer, because that's what the great agents have always done.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a great comment, Keith, on all of that. Keith, take us home on the last question. Tim, we always ask this for all of our guests is like a takeaway. So
yeah. So if you were an agent or a brokerage, what's the one thing you would implement today to help your business? And you can't say AI. Just kidding.
It's easy, raise.
Oh.
No, you know what? Raise is actually awesome. So I'll plug it for you, James, so you don't have to. You guys should look at RAYSE and you should ask James about it. But, I heard a few brokers having a conversation, and I'm going to reference this conversation as the banana paradox, right? Because they're so afraid about talking about compensation or concessions or whatever. So they were like, if my seller has 10 bananas that they're willing to give up, like, how do I put that out there so that they know how many bananas are available on the buyer side? And if the buyer already has 4 bananas and they don't really need the 6 bananas, how can they lower the price of the home by 6 bananas? And I think whatever version of that takes, you need to start having those role-playing conversations today. You need to really engage deeply on all the different scenarios, all the different ways in which you can have that conversation that's meaningful, transparent, and valuable to the consumer. So that's one area I would look at. I'd probably have a lot of conversations about steering. I'd probably play some of the really bad videos and voicemails, and I would talk to people about, sort of passive steering or unintentional steering versus like really doing it. And I would show them the differences there and where those gray lines are. I think we need to have a lot more conversations, because I think some people steer unintentionally, right? They don't think of that as steering, whatever that is. So I think having those conversations. And then the last would be, if I owned a brokerage today, I'd start asking myself whether I'm in the right place for the future, right? Do I still want to be independent if I'm independent? If I'm a large team at a corporation, do I want to become independent? Like, who's covered under a settlement? What's my best position short-term, long-term? And sort of how does that take me into the future? I would definitely be looking at that today and wondering, am I in the right spot? Because more litigation is on our horizon. It's not done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great response, by the way, Tim. I don't even have anything to add to it. I think it's all really good talking points everyone should be thinking about. Tim, thanks for being here, man. That was awesome, really insightful. I know what to get you at the next conference. I'm really excited about that. And
Dead Bunny t-shirt.
By the way, it's not going to be me. Someone else is going to listen to this, and there might be several at the next event. So, Tim, genuinely, thanks for being here, my friend. We'll look forward to having you back in the future.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.